Hi everyone, I'm Jason. Welcome to my channel. So today I'll be sharing how to do a chair pose, the misalignment that we may encounter, and the variation that we can get into from a chair pose. So let's begin. Okay, there are actually two ways of getting into your chair pose. One is from your standing utkatasana, and the second one would be from your standing forward fold. So let's talk about the utkatasana first. So in utkatasana, you can actually choose to have your feet joined together or slightly wide apart. So I personally prefer to have it wide apart so that as I get into my chair pose, I will feel more grounded and more stable in the pose. So if you want to take on a challenge, you can have your feet joined together. So that is for your stand. So once you have picked your stand, the second thing that you need to do is having your core activate. So once you're here, you just need to have your lower core activate, suck in your lower core to allow the hips to slightly tilt backward. So suck in your lower core to have your hips slightly tilt backward. So once you're there, you may start to have your hips or your bums to sink and sit backward in order for your knees and the thigh to bend and the torso to slowly fall forward. Once you're here, you may start to have your arms extend up over your head. So that's your chair pose. So let's recap. So the first thing that you need to do is to pick a stand. Either have your feet joined or apart. Second thing, activation of the core. Have your lower core suck in to allow the hips to slide to backward. Once you're here, you may start to have your hips or your bum sink and sit backward in order for your knees and the thigh to bend and the torso to bow and fall forward. And lastly, you can actually extend your arms forward and up. And there you go. There's your chair pose. So let's talk about the misalignment that we may encounter. So the first misalignment that we may encounter is as we get into your chair pose, some of us may have our knees drop forward. Technically, that is not wrong if you actually activate the proper muscle, but if you don't, you may actually feel the tension will be accumulated onto your knees instead of your quads. So that's why for starter, it's preferable for you to have your hips to sink backward to allow your quads to activate. So that is the misalignment one that we may encounter. So the second one would be the knees as well. So you may notice some of us as we get into your chair pose, some of our knees are knocked or some of us is actually apart. So the way to readjust it is not turning the thigh in and out. So you can actually look and check out what happened towards my feet. As I do this, my feet tend to move here and there, my balance tends to tip off. So what I would advise is, in order for us to counter this issue, so what we need to do is have the four corner of the feet press firmly against the floor to give you an upward lifting motion. Okay, so I'll do it one more time. So let's say in case we have a knock knees. So what we need to do is have the four corner of the feet press firmly against the floor to give you an upward lifting motion so that your hips, knees, and your feet would align. So that is the misalignment 2 that we may encounter. Third misalignment. So as we sink to your chair pose, so some of us may have the hips tilted forward and activate the hips flexor and arching our lower back. So the way to counter it is either you may allow your hips to slightly tilt backward or to have your lower core activate to scoop the hips back. So that is why I mentioned earlier that before you get into your chair pose, it is advisable to have your lower core activate to allow your hips to slide tilt back before you get into your chair pose. So that is the third misalignment. So the fourth one, it's the ribs. So some of us may have the ribs pop forward as we get into your chair pose. Something like this. So you will actually have your back slightly arched and have your ribs to pop forward. So this is usually caused and due by the side. So you can actually imagine, so as we get into your chair pose, the reason for the ribs to pop forward is because our side is stationary and constantly look at the front without moving. So the way to actually counter this issue is imagine there's a line projected out from your chest and your gaze should actually follow wherever this line moves towards you. So as I go into my chair pose, my gaze is continuously looking at this line. So as I sink backward, my chest is folding down, my gaze is following this line. So that you may actually counter the issue of popping ribs. So that is the fourth misalignment that we may encounter. The fifth one comes the shoulder, which is the arms. So you may notice as some of us have our arms thrown up, our shoulders start to shrug up. So in order for us to actually have this issue solved, I would advise that as you extend your arms, have your arms stop right before your shoulders start to shrug up. So it's not wrong that your chair pose, your arms is at this position. Okay, it's okay if you actually have a problem with your shoulder or injury with your shoulder. So that is the first solution. The second solution you may actually have is allow your arms to slightly open wider as you continue to throw your arms up. So remember, in chair pose or any arms extension, as we throw arms up, try not to let the shoulder lift up. It will actually engage and cause a little bit tension onto neck and uncomfortable feeling onto neck and shoulder. That is the fifth alignment. So this is basically the misalignment and the way to get into chair pose for Tadasana. So let's talk about the next one. Okay, next let's talk about how to get into your chair pose from your standing forward fold and the misalignment that we may encounter. So let's say if you're in your standing forward fold. So once you're in your standing forward fold, what you need to do is have your hips and your bums to sink and sit backward to allow your knees and the thigh to bend. So once you're here, the next thing that you need to do is not lift your torso up directly. If you do so, here's the misalignment that you may encounter. First, the popping of the ribs. Second, the pelvic tilting forward and overly activate the hips flexor. So what we need to do is, as we want to rise up from this pose, is you're trying to press the feet firmly against the floor to feel that the spine is trying to unwind up as you get into your chair pose. And you may slowly extend the arms up. So that is how you get into your chair pose from your standing forward fold. So let's recap. Let's say you're in your standing forward fold. So the first thing that you need to do is to allow your hips to sink backward in order for your knees and the thigh to bend. And the next thing that you need to do to allow the torso to rise up is press your feet against the floor firmly to allow your spine to unwind up. As you may feel the vertebra, the spine is slowly unwinding up inch by inch to counter the issue of the popping ribs and the overly tilt of the hips flexor over the pelvic. So there you go. Finally, the variation. So chair pose itself is actually one of the variation that you can actually get into. So let's say if you actually want to train on the muscle endurance of your quads, hamstring, your glutes, and your core, you can actually stay in the pose for 30 seconds and rest for 10 seconds and come back to hold it in the pose for another 30 seconds. That is for your muscle endurance training. So if let's say muscle endurance is actually too easy for you, you want to actually have a little bit more movement, like you want to train onto your muscle explosiveness, you can actually choose to have your movement kept between your chair pose and Tadasana. You can actually repeatedly move in between your chair pose and your Tadasana. So if this is still too boring for you, you can actually have your heels lift up as you rise. And sink your heels down and sit your hips backward. And repeatedly move the movement by lifting your heels up as you stand up to Tadasana, sit back to your chair pose. And if this is still a little bit boring and not up to your challenge yet, you can actually choose to jump. You can actually lift up and all the way back. Lift up, all the way back. Lift up, all the way back. So that is the way to actually train onto your muscle elasticity and your muscle explosiveness. That is the variation 2, second, that you can actually do. So the third variation that you can actually get into is, so we get into your chair pose first. Once you're here, just first have your right leg, okay, to press firmly against the floor so that you can actually have your left leg lift slowly and place the ankle onto your right thigh. So here you go, you have your third variation as in your half lotus chair. And as for your fourth one, you can actually get into is your Garuda leg by crossing the leg over. So that is your fourth variation. So the fifth variation that you can get into is, once you get into your chair pose, Okay, same, you can actually have one of the leg press firmly against the floor to activate the quads and the hamstring and the glutes. So the other leg can actually start to lift it forward, to the side, to the back. Or you can actually draw a half circle motion like skiing motion to train on the hips mobility for the moving leg and muscle stability for the supporting leg. Okay, that is the fifth variation that you can get into. So for the sixth variation, so as most of us will be familiar with, which is the chair pose twist. So as we get into your chair pose, okay, you can have your palm joined together. Once you're here, you just allow your torso, your trunk, to turn and twist to the outer thigh. And there you go, there's your chair pose twist. So last but not least, okay, once you get into your chair pose, next one is you can actually allow your knees to sink forward. So what you need to do is, bear in mind, you just need to have your feet continuously press against the floor to give you that upward motion. Once you have your feet firmly pressed against the floor, you can actually have your hips sink forward with the hips scoop. So from here, you're not just activating your quads, hamstring, glutes, you're activating your ankle and your shin muscle as well. So that is the seventh variation that you can get into. So these are the variation that I could think of. Let's say if you have any idea or any variation that we can get into, feel free to comment on the channel below so that I can learn something from you. So this is the end of the video, and if you like my video, feel free to subscribe it, like it, share it. So thank you and namaste.